Thanks. My name's Rosalyn Eves, and I'll be moderating the panel tonight. I wanted to start by having our panelists introduce themselves, maybe tell us about your books and where they can find you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alex Harrow. I write queer science fiction and fantasy. I essentially write queerness with a chance of explosions. My debut science fiction novel is Empire of Light, which is a gay firefly with magic about an assassin who will set the world on fire to save the guy he loves. And it is out now with Nine Star Press. I also do various short fiction and I'm always working on multiple deadlines at once, currently also working on an alternate history fantasy. So sci-fi and fantasy with lots of queerness is my thing. Yeah, that's me.
I'm Allie May. I write young adult fantasy. I haven't talked about my current projects. Currently, I am working on lots of fairy tale retellings. I have 5 short stories published in various anthologies, all based off of fairy tales. And I recently got the rights back to them. And so I'm getting ready to release my own anthology of fairy tale retellings. And I have started to dive into some lesser known fairy tales. The one I'm most excited about is based off of She Bear. And instead of her turning into a bear, she turns into a gorgon because the world is kind of inspired by Greek islands. And so she turns into a gorgon and turns people to stone. And that's the story I'm working on right now. I'm really excited.
I'm impressed with people that can follow the conversation and the chat at the same time. I do not have that talent.
The Discord chat is really overwhelming for me. I don't know if it's my anxiety or what, that it's just like, so I did a test run with a different writing conference that was the same way, run through Discord, but streaming on YouTube. And so it kind of helped me figure it out a little bit. But yeah, if this is your first time, it's a lot.
Yeah, splitting your screen definitely helps. Popping it out.
All right. Welcome to take 2 of the start of this panel on sensitivity and authenticity readers. We're going to start by having our panelists introduce themselves.
All right, quick introduction here. My name is Alex Harrow. My pronouns are he or they. I'm a queer and trans author of queer science fiction and fantasy, and my most recent book is called Empire of Light. It's out now with Nine Star Press, and it is essentially queer firefly with magic about an assassin who is going to set the world on fire to save the guy he loves. And you can find me on social media, etc. at Alex Harrow SFF.
I'm Allie May. I write a lot of young adult fantasy. Primarily right now I'm working on a lot of fairy tale retellings. I've had 5 short stories published in anthologies, and recently I got the rights back to my stories. So I am currently working on releasing my own anthology of fairy tale retellings. And I started looking more into some lesser known fairy tales. The one I'm most excited about is based off of She Bear. If you don't know what that is, look it up. It's crazy and wild and makes no sense. And I am so excited to help it make sense. And instead of turning into a bear, she turns into a gorgon and turns people to stone.
Interesting. Hi, I'm Ravyn. My pronouns are she, her. I have written a novella in the past called Shizukeza, which is available on Amazon. Now I mostly write tabletop books, as well as do a lot of tabletop shows on Twitch. I'm going to throw my link tree into chat, which is just linktr.ee/theravvyn. You can also just look up the Ravyn Evermore, Ravyn spelled Ravyn, theravyevermore.com to see all my stuff there. And then I am also a sensitivity reader.
And that is a perfect lead-in. Thank you, Ravyn, for the first question, which is kind of a 2-part question, but to make sure everybody's on the same page, first of all, what is a sensitivity and authenticity reader, and what can they do for you as a writer?
Even since you are one, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm always hesitant to start because I don't want to interrupt somebody's thought. Yeah, so
I feel
a
you.
sensitivity reader is basically, I guess I'll answer from the author's perspective. So if you're an author, and let's say that you want to have a character in the book that is transgender, and you yourself are not transgender, um, or it could be any other letter out of the LGBTQ plus, um, for example. So you don't have that lived experience. You don't necessarily know exactly what it's like to be somebody from that marginalized group. So the idea of a sensitivity reader is to find someone who is, have them read through the story for you and let you know if anything that you said is offensive, or if it's being presented authentically. It's something you still want to do your research and try to get it as close as possible before you send it to the sensitivity reader. But they'll let you know if like you just misunderstood something or something's misconstrued, or if you're using outdated language for different things. A lot of things like that. And so for me myself, I do sensitivity reads for if you have trans characters or transgender content, or bi content, because I also am bi.
Yeah, to add to that too, so I also do sensitivity reading, and have been doing that for things like non-binary identities, transmasculine identities, LGBTQ content across the bi, pan, and arrow A spectrum, as well as sometimes for like specific linguistic things, since I'm also an immigrant, specifically from Germany. So I've had people ask me questions about that before. So you can basically get sensitivity readers for any specific identity. And I'm going to say specific here because that is super important here, that as an author, in order to find a good sensitivity reader and the right sensitivity reader for your project, you are being really specific. I sometimes get requests where someone's like, hey, I'm writing trans characters and I'm writing a trans woman. Can you help me with this? And I go, hey, I identify as a non-binary person and a trans man. I cannot be a sensitivity reader for that content because that's not my shared experience. So it's really important to be specific and also be clear that your sensitivity reader isn't an editor. They are a reader that give you really targeted feedback on that specific thing. And they're typically also people part of your like editorial team. So you typically pay them as you would any other part of your editorial team if you're self-publishing, or sometimes we get paid by publishers as well.
I have not done sensitivity reading except for brief advice that I've given in my critique group for anxiety and depression. And I am getting ready to do a sensitivity read for one of my writer friends, who is she's writing an aromantic character, and she is trying to figure out if she actually identifies as that. And so she doesn't feel comfortable enough writing it and claiming that it is own voices. And so she reached out to me and wants me to verify that what she wrote is authentic. But one of the things I want to point out is you can't always rely on just one sensitivity reader, because there are no universal experiences. You could send out something like Alex was talking about, reading for a trans woman. You could send it out to 4 different sensitivity readers and get entirely different feedback from all of them. And sometimes you need those multiple point of views in order to know whether or not it is authentic, because what one person, you may be entirely accurately representing one person's experience, but 3 other people could say, no, this is not at all what I experienced. And so you need to be careful with that. That's why we say sensitivity readers and not a sensitivity reader.
That's a really good point. Like especially particularly for trans characters, a person who kind of comes to terms with that and comes out later in life will have a different perspective than someone who, say, had a super supportive family and they figured it out really young, and they started their transition, like right at puberty, for example. And yes, I also forgot to mention mental illnesses and things like that are another big one. I also do sensitivity reads for PTSD and for ADHD as well. If you have a character that you specifically want to include that in, I can tell you how it's different from, say, the stereotypical that you think somebody's just talking and then all of a sudden they go squirrel, which is a stereotype that's not really accurate. So that's also a good topic to look for sensitivity readers on.
Yeah, I think that's like a super important thing to point out is like the intersectionality. Like I feel like a lot of us like have multiple things that we can be experts on, but also considering that none of this is a monolith, meaning, like my experience as a white transmasc person is going to be different from a non-binary transmasc person of color, for example. So the more voices you really can get feedback from and can get to chime in, the more helpful it typically is. And I think that's also sometimes something that trips authors up, where they're like, oh, hey, am I writing this? I'm writing from an own voice's background, but am I doing it right? And I feel like that's a bit of a fallacy, because again, like you have your own lived experience if you are sharing that background. And there definitely are some of those questions to consider, where it's like, yeah, this is your experience. You can't really argue with that. But vice versa, don't argue with your sensitivity reader about their experience either.
I was actually going to say something along those lines of, I had to recently put aside my novel that I was working on, where the main character has anxiety, and it kind of crosses over into PTSD a little bit. And I was portraying her thoughts and her behaviors as accurate to me. And I had a lot of people who didn't understand it. They didn't connect with it. And so when I go back to it, I'm going to have to work with other sensitivity readers who have anxiety, even though I am portraying my own story, because I need ideas. I need feedback from people on maybe where it's working, where it's not working, to try and make it broader than just my one unique experience.
One of the questions that we had was, at what point in your writing do you reach out to a sensitivity or authenticity reader?
Honestly, and I don't know, I see this a lot where people are like, well, it's like once I've written it, right? Because it's like an edit. And I recently had this conversation with a friend of mine that it's actually like the earlier the better, because let's say like you're already thinking about it, and it kind of depends on how your sensitivity reader is going to work. Like I personally have done a lot of reads of whole projects that I would read through and then kind of give feedback on, is this accurate or not? But depending on the sensitivity reader, you could also hire someone fairly early in the process, especially to kind of brainstorm some things and things you have questions about. I think it kind of depends on your individual sensitivity reader, and also specifically the questions you have at what point of the process you want to do that. But honestly, I would say the earlier the better, because sometimes there might be some things a sensitivity reader can point out some of your own biases or things that you don't know, and you just don't even know that that's a thing, or that your thought process is going down an avenue that might become problematic. So that's kind of my take on it. The earlier you can, the better.
I would echo that as well. But a lot of it too depends on your budget also. So like if you can afford to have sensitivity readers really early in the process and then have them read it again and again and again as you refine your story, that's like ideal. But if you have a lower budget, you just can't afford to pay a lot of sensitivity readers to do a lot of work. I'd say the ideal spot, like for me personally, would be to come in when the rough draft is done. So you haven't started really doing a lot of edits yet. It's still pretty rough, but you have the whole idea down. And that way I can go through and read it, and I can say, okay, here's where you're probably going to need to edit and do some rewrites and things like that for this or that. Before it gets too refined, because then you could have a spot where, you spent money on an editor that's edited this whole chapter, and then your sensitivity reader comes behind and says, oh yeah, no, this is horrible. You need to rewrite this whole thing. It's a lot of work. So rough draft, I'd say, is probably around the latest that you'd want to bring somebody in.
And I think if you can get those parts of the story cleared up and polished with a sensitivity reader, they're less likely to change when you're doing later drafts of the project, to where, once you get it approved by a sensitivity reader and you're like, yeah, this is great. This is exactly how I experienced it. As long as you're not editing those things, making major changes to that, then you don't have to go through another sensitivity read process later. So you do need to be cautious of that, because if you write 5-6 drafts after you've had a sensitivity reader go through it, you have an editor go through it, and you make major changes, then you might need to revisit the sensitivity reading process depending on what was cut out or changed.
So the next question that kind of follows from that is, where can people find sensitivity readers? I know from my experience, sometimes I have hired my own sensitivity readers, but I've also had my publisher hire sensitivity readers for me. So I've had kind of both experiences, but I'm curious, where would you suggest people who need sensitivity readers go to find those readers?
I've from the other side of it, where authors have found me, I've mostly found through social media, particularly Twitter, where somebody throws out, "Hey, I'm working on this project," or "I've got this indie book that I'm doing. I need a sensitivity reader," and then I'll see that and respond. So social media is a great way to do that, especially if you're in writer and editor circles. You've networked with a lot of people like that. I do sensitivity reading very much so on the side, freelance. So that's usually where I'm looking for work. But it might be different for people who do it more frequently than I do.
Yeah, I would second that. I'm honestly one of those people too who has to put their rates on their website still, but I kind of do this informally through Twitter and stuff a lot too. So because, and this is kind of the dark side of sensitivity reads, I guess. So there used to be a database that Justina Ireland, I think, co-created, called Writing in the Margins. That was a great resource, but the problem is it was being abused. Sensitivity readers were hired and never paid, or people were disparaging against them because they were expecting certain things that they never offered. And so that database ended up getting taken down because it became just a system of abuse. That's also something to consider when you're hiring a sensitivity reader, is be really specific about what your needs are, what your questions are, be upfront. Mention some of the things that are going on in your manuscript. I'm kind of seeing a question in the chat about critiquing stories that involve discrimination or involve really trigger heavy material. Let people know that. I'm personally a huge advocate for content warnings, no matter what. I think it kind of again comes down to communicating clearly with your sensitivity reader. And yeah, personally, I find Twitter to be really helpful. See kind of who you're following. Do they have people to recommend? Sometimes it's just a good idea to put a shout out on social media, especially if you need a very specific type of sensitivity reader, because you might not be following someone like that yet, but someone you follow might be able to recommend you someone. So any sort of more open social media like Twitter is definitely helpful for that.
I was going to say Twitter as well. And just making connections with other writers. That's how you that's how you network. That's how you get access to those people is by making connections. And sometimes social media can be very intimidating. And that's just one of the things. If you want to have a sensitivity reader, if you want to have this accurately portrayed, then, you're going to have to step out of your comfort zone and go asking around and talking to people that you don't know. You may have to, send people some direct messages and, reach out to them. And the worst they say is no, but, at least you're being honest and trying and open to making necessary changes. Writers groups, I think, are also great, where you can find other connections. For my novel, again, I had a sensitivity readers, not a sensitivity reader. One of them came from my online writers group, it's worldwide. And I contacted my friend, who was born and raised, she lives in India. And I realized a couple of drafts, and I realized I was relying too heavily on, I was inspiring this culture based off of India, and it became too real world heavy handed. And so I worked with her, and she connected me to some other people, some other sensitivity readers, to give me feedback on how to make it seem less like the real world, because it became too much to where there was no way I was not going to offend people, because I am a white woman in America, and it was too much. And so I worked with them on ways to step it back, and ways to make it more fantasy, because it's a second world fantasy. And so I worked with them on language that was not okay to use, specifically regarding like clothing and things like that. And even like the foods they ate and things like that I worked with them on figuring out just better language to use, so that you could kind of get the idea, oh yeah, I could see that was inspired, but without it being copied and pasted from our world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also, like, Allie, what you just mentioned about writing groups too. I think writing groups are kind of invaluable. Like, I'm personally super active at the League of Utah Writers, and I often get into discussions with people who are like asking questions, and that's totally like always welcome. That said, also always be really clear in your questions. Go like, hey, is it okay if I'm asking you these questions? Like, I just had a discussion with a friend of mine who was like, hey, would you be interested in like looking over this? And I asked her like, hey, I have a question about, like, I'm writing an alternate history fantasy that's set in 1946 Germany. And I am not a Jewish person, but I need some feedback on, like, is this okay to do or not? Am I overstepping here? Like, just in general terms. But even if you have like a question like that, like, make sure that the other person has the spoons and the space to answer this question.
Yes.
And don't be disrespectful about it. Like, I still, I love the question that I've seriously gotten people before who are like, okay, explain to me how to write a non-binary character in 5 minutes. I'm like, yo, this doesn't fit
That's
into
a whole
Twitter
lifetime
bit.
conversation.
This is not, and it was really like, it's in person, and you're kind of like, okay, how do I respectfully tell you that if that's your expectation from me, you are absolutely coming from the wrong angle, and you need to maybe check that and check your why.
Yeah.
But it's like sometimes like really earnest questions can just come across really offensive. So like, yeah, check yourself, and make sure that, the other person is like in a space where they can answer those questions, especially if they maybe hit on really like challenging topics or triggering topics.
Yeah, and let me clarify, she did volunteer to help me. So it wasn't like I hunted her down and pinned her down, was like, you will help me. She was very excited to help me. She she was thrilled. She was over the moon and was sharing it with other writer friends, her local writer friends, that were also very excited to help me. But yeah, you do need to be very careful that you're not overstepping your bounds. And I think that goes a lot into the content warnings, being very, very clear in conversation before you have them read it, to make sure that it is okay for them to read it.
Yeah.
So I want to make very clear, and you guys have talked about this, but sensitivity readers should be paid. In case they haven't made that clear, you're asking them to do labor for you. That should be recompensed.
Yeah.
And I want to come back to some of the things that Alex has kind of hit on already, but what about the expectations for the writers that approach sensitivity readers? Because there have been some fairly notorious cases where people have published problematic content and then tried to hide behind their sensitivity readers, or have outed sensitivity readers who were supposed to be anonymous in the process. What does it look like to approach a sensitivity reader in good faith, and what is the writer's responsibility here?
Yeah, those are okay. So I think there are a couple of basic things that people should be aware of. First off, a sensitivity read does not in any way, shape, or form protect you from critique. I think there's also an important thing to consider is that as an author, there's only so much you can control. And obviously, your sensitivity readers' experience might be different from maybe part of your audience who might be calling out certain things that you maybe did get wrong, and maybe that's not what you intended, but it's still what happened. And so one of the things to keep in mind here as an author, I see this on social media, like sadly, all the time, is one thing you can control is your reaction. And that is to come at it from a position of, oh yeah, I'm learning about this. I am like adding to my skill set here. So yeah, like some basic do's and don'ts are, again, your sensitivity reader isn't a guarantee. They're giving you their best expertise, but there are things that they might not know. So like there isn't really like a foolproof method. And typically, do not out your sensitivity reader. In general, do not ever out anyone, like no matter how like vocal they are in their Twitter bio. Like that's just not your job of things to do. Again, also if that's your like gut reaction to like hide behind like sensitivity read that you've gotten done, like it feels really performative. It doesn't really feel like you're genuinely trying to learn from that experience. And yes, it's super hard to be in that place where you messed up and have to like kind of figure out what you're doing with this. But one of the biggest things that I really encourage authors to do is to take that experience and genuinely grow from that. Like that's usually where I see people implode all over the place. I personally was involved in an anthology this year that we actually pulled from print because the person who edited it and curated it turned out to be a serial abuser of people of color, and actually turns out also like was an abuser of many of us in the anthology. And we later on realized, oh wait, this wasn't just me, this was a systemic thing. And it was like a really uncomfortable thing to navigate there, to like also kind of check like, ooh, like how does this overlap? And but honestly, like one of the biggest lessons that I personally learned is that when something like this goes down, it's not about you. Like do not center yourself in your reaction. It's really more about what harm did you cause and how are you going to do better next time. So if a sensitivity reader says something that maybe doesn't jive with your vision and you like react in a combative way, check that, walk away from it for a minute, and figure out like how to handle this in a respectful way.
Ravyn, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, my my ADHD is a little bad today. What was the original question again?
The question was about what is the author's responsibility when they hire a sensitivity reader? Because sometimes people just want the sensitivity reader to give them the check of, yep, the content's appropriate. So what does the author need
I
to
remember
do?
where I was going with that. Yeah. So communication is really important up front. So if I'm coming into something as a sensitivity reader, I want to know what the author expects, so that I have an idea of where they're coming from. And then generally I can tell them right off the bat, like before I even look at their work, if they're coming at me with certain phrases or certain angles, I can be like, okay, I can already tell you what you need to work on. Um, and then also echoing something that Alex said is like, if you're coming at this from a well, I have a sensitivity reader, so I'm not liable for anything, that has the same energy as saying, well, no, this joke's okay because I have a trans friend. And it's like, no, that's not how that works. So yeah, don't use your sensitivity readers as a shield. That's not a guarantee that everything that's potentially offensive to every single person out there is removed from your story. All they can do is let you know from their lived experience what is appropriate or not. So yeah, having multiple sensitivity readers helps with that. Approaching this from I'm not buying insurance, I'm making sure I'm doing the right thing. From that perspective also is really important.
I think if you're truly genuine about wanting to authentically portray a certain identity, then you will, you will be willing to learn. Your sensitivity readers can kind of tell if you're willing to learn, if you are truly the student and not the teacher. If you start to lecture your sensitivity readers about, well, I included this because blah blah blah, no. Like they're going to shut you down, and you have to be genuine, you have to be earnest in learning and growing and making positive changes. Because your sensitivity readers are not just there to check a box for you. And I will restate, I think one of the best ways to do that is by having multiple sensitivity readers, not just one. Because if you just have one sensitivity reader, then it kind of seems like you're checking a box. Be like, yep, sensitivity read, done. Okay, it's perfect. I'm not going to offend anyone because I did what I was supposed to. And so it's, being truly open to feedback. It's the same thing with just any regular critique group. You have to, you throw yourself out there, and you have to be open to actually making changes to your writing, to the things that you're putting on the page. You have to honestly want to make changes, and you can always tell by the reactions that if an author comments, those authors who stock their Goodreads reviews to bash anyone who gives them a 1 star, it's, you can tell that it's just not good, and it's not a good situation to be in. And I think our writing network is working much harder to try and make those kinds of people public. There's a whole new Twitter account that's just listing out agents and editors who are problematic, who are abusive or rude or kind of shady, and we're getting better about turning this whisper network and making it public. And so if you do something like that, it will come back to bite you in the butt hard.
Yeah, I think in general, like coming at it from a like, hey, this is a mutual, really vulnerable thing to do. Like, I think in general, like publishing can get really anxiety inducing for sure. And again, like just do your best. Like I always tell people like, hey, if you're coming at it from a do no harm perspective and you do your best in that, and then are willing to learn and do better from the situations where you do mess up, because we all are going to invariably mess up. Like that's just something that's going to happen. I feel like you're on the right track.
To add an analogy to it, just to kind of come at it from a different perspective. So the importance of hiring multiple sensitivity readers. Let's taking it to a different topic, let's say you wanted to write a character that was a fireman or a firefighter or any other job like that. Would you just talk to one firefighter and leave it at that, or would you do a lot of research, probably talk to multiple firemen or firefighters, and kind of approach it from that direction?
And also, like, to be clear, sometimes you can get some input like pretty informally. It doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, hire like 5 different sensitivity readers for like this one thing, but it might be helpful to have conversations with different people just to get that input. Like, totally get how some people are like, well, I can't afford to hire like 5 different people for this manuscript. Cool, but still like question your own connections, your own kind of like circle that might be able to give you some input on things. Just do not expect from them to read an entire manuscript for free, because that's not how this works. Or go into it going like, well, I'll just trade you a service. Like, no, that's like devaluing all the emotional labor that goes into sensitivity reading.
Yeah, it's physical labor. They're doing almost the same work as an editor. And it's emotional labor. It's vulnerable for them. It's hard work, but it's necessary, and that's why there are so many sensitivity readers out there, because we are sick and tired of being incorrectly portrayed. How many autistic people do you know that are super offended by Sheldon Cooper's portrayal of autism on Big Bang Theory, or people with OCD who cannot stand the super old TV show Monk, because his OCD it was a stereotype, and it was a misinformed stereotype. And yes, they can be used as stepping stones to learn more. But we live in a world where all the information you could ever want is at our fingertips. You can simple Google search. It's not that hard to do your research. And like what Ravyn said, if you're writing about a fireman, you do your research on what they do and what their experience is. If you're writing, a book about a teacher or a baker, you don't just assume what their lives are. You do research on what it is that they actually do, and how much time they spend doing what they do, how much free time they have, to accurately portray it. And this is the same thing. You're doing your research because you want to be accurate.
I think we can turn the time over to Q&A if you guys are good with that.
All right. We have a couple questions. The first one is from Treehugger, who asks, how do you find a sensitivity reader for someone rarely written about, like Slavic or Greek Catholic? With an apology to Alex and Rosalyn for repetition of questions.
You're totally good. I think sometimes that's a tough one, where if you need someone really specific and maybe don't have someone like this in your circles. Again, I would definitely try the good old Twitter shout out and kind of see, also researching sensitivity readers' websites for that specific piece might be helpful.
Can I add? So my day job is as a professor, and I would say you can also reach out to academic experts in various fields. Sometimes they might not respond, but I've been surprised by people who did respond, and they might be able to direct you to people as well.
I was going to say networking, basic networking, and if you want to be honest about portraying it, you'll put in the work to find the sensitivity reader. And it may be really hard if it's super, super specific, but networking.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, networking's a big one.
All right. The next question is kind of along the same lines. It's from Kodo Darkness, who asks, is there a specific form or place where sensitivity readers have listed their contact info that they're available to be paid to read, or does the writer need to just go to Facebook and Twitter and ask the whole on who's available?
Yes to both. Some people put that information on their websites or their social media, etc., especially if it's a big part of what they do. I know a lot of people who are editors who also do sensitivity reads who will list that there. For me, I think I have it listed somewhere. It might be on my website, but it's not something that I advertise a ton just because I'm usually busy doing my other stuff. But absolutely, anybody's welcome to DM me on Twitter. Shoot me an email. It's just Ravyn@theRavynEvermore.com, or hit me up on Discord, wherever you can find me. You're welcome to message me, and I'm more than happy to do sensitivity reading work if it's an area that I have lived experience in. So
Yeah.
yes to both.
Same here. Like, unfortunately, there isn't really a like unified like form or anything like that where people are putting this. But yeah, checking people's websites is definitely helpful. Checking the Twitter bio, like DMing them, just asking, hey, are you doing sensitivity reads for this, or would you be interested in doing this? Because again, a lot of us have it on our websites. I myself need to update my website rather desperately. Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah, I don't have it on my website because I haven't really done it. So the only way I get contacted is by friends from my writers group who know that I have anxiety, depression, that I'm, asexual, that I'm demi-romantic. But I'm also on the broader scale of, it's easy to find actual sensitivity readers for, for my personal experiences that I have, for the things that I could do sensitivity reads for. It's a little harder to find the more specifics, which is why I don't do it a whole lot. But I also, I'm a mom and I write, and I don't have a ton of time to dedicate to doing sensitivity reads for others, which is why, I use a lot of networking for it. And it helps that I'm part of an online worldwide writing group that can help connect me to more specific sensitivity reads, but not everyone has those kinds of connections, which is where Twitter comes in handy, use those hashtags. I'm always retweeting if someone's like, hey, I need to find someone to do this. I'll click retweet. Sure. I'll help you find it because it doesn't apply to me, but someone may follow me who it does apply to, and they could help.
All right. To round out the finding section, Mindwarp asks, how do you find alpha and beta readers for content that you intend to hand over to sensitivity readers later?
Also, often, for me personally, that happens a lot in writing groups because it's usually like someone who's already familiar with my work. So network in your writing group, but also like network again on social media and Twitter. Like I feel like it's kind of like a broken record sort of answer, but really looking in your circles, because I'll quite often go like, oh, hey, I know you're writing this interesting thing. I totally want to read it. So yeah, often that kind of happens like one-on-one. Sometimes people like to exchange beta reads. Those are kind of like things to do. I'm part of a writing group that has kind of like a beta read exchange program where you like sign up to beta read something, but that also means you later on like get a beta read. Like it kind of depends on really like what your needs are and what your wants are.
That
All right. Felicity S. asks, are most sensitivity readers open to reading and critiquing stories that involve discrimination, even in extreme forms?
depends.
I'm not. Yeah, it depends. I can't speak for everyone, but for myself personally, it depends a lot on what perspective that's coming from. One of the first questions I would probably ask that person is like, is there a reason that you feel the need to have this in your book? Because there's usually not a reason to put discrimination, especially extreme discrimination, in a book, if you're not part of that group that's being discriminated against. There's a lot of ways to tell stories without having to include that kind of thing. But if you are putting that in there, if it's from any other perspective of this exists in the world and I'm here to show you why that's bad, I'm probably not going to be interested in reading it.
Yeah, I think that's the why, like, why are you putting that in? Super important. Also, again, like being specific about what are you working with? What are you looking for? Again, being like clear in your content warnings, like, oh, hey, like this is in here. But yeah, know your why.
I was going to say content warnings. Make sure you have open communication with your sensitivity readers so that they're not caught off guard by something that could trigger them. That's why content warnings exist, because people have real mental, we have mental illnesses, these things, and reliving some of these things, it causes serious harm to us. And that's why you include content warnings. And, even if you don't want to throw out and be like, hey, this is exactly what happens in my story, will you read it? You can always ask them and say, hey, do you have anything that specifically that you do not want to read, something that will trigger you, so that I'm aware, before I throw my manuscript at you. Make sure that, have them give you a list of their triggers, because a lot of times sensitivity readers have those off the top of their head. They know what they can't handle. We know what we can't handle.
Yeah, we do a lot of that in the tabletop games that I do. One of the numerous safety tools that we use at my table is something called lines and veils before we start any game, and that's where everyone can anonymously put in lines which are like, these are the things I absolutely 100% do not want in this game because they are triggers or otherwise. And then veils are things that are like, I'm okay with this being in the story, I'm okay with this being in the game, but I need broad strokes on this, no details. It needs to happen sort of off screen primarily. So something similar to that absolutely is great for sensitivity readers.